Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I'm pleased to take the call in the third reading of the Construction Contracts Amendment Bill. This bill has been extensively debated in the House, and Labor supports it. And its real intent was to speed up resolving disputes in the construction contract cases, and it was all about greater accountability. It also extended the scope of this area to include things like design, engineering, and quantity surveying. And on the face of it, it was a pretty sensible updating of a piece of legislation. When we went into the Select Committee process, it became apparent very quickly that there was something rather substantial missing from this piece of legislation. Many of the submitters talked about the lack of protection for subcontractors when the main construction company got into trouble. And this went on and on and on. And as other speakers before me have mentioned, the context around this piece of legislation was really important, Mr Speaker, because it went into the House. It was first introduced into the House on the 29th of January 2013. Mainzeal collapse happened on the 5th of February 2013, which was just a few days later. When it made it to the Select Committee at the beginning of June 2013, that was the issue on everybody's mind, and that was the issue that people wanted to discuss and very seriously discuss. And you'd think that between the 29th of January and the 1st of June, there could have been some thinking done by officials, by the Minister, the then Minister Maurice Williamson, on this issue. You'd think there would have been some serious thinking done around, well, let's have another look at that bill that we've just sent off to Select Committee. Have we missed something? Is there something else that we could be doing? Let's get officials working on that. Well, that didn't happen, Mr Speaker, and instead when it got reported back on the 11th of December, another 6 months later, more or less, there was nothing in it on retentions. And I do want to draw the House's attention to the commentary that came back from the Select Committee, just briefly, which did have a section in it headed retentions, and that was clearly because the opposition members, and I really do want to acknowledge my colleague Clayton Cosgrove, who did most of the heavy lifting on this issue, and also Julianne Genter from the Greens. There was concern after concern after concern brought out. And this was recognised in the commentary where it said we're aware of growing concern in the sector relating to retentions. It went on about what retentions were all about and what the actual issue was. But it said that this issue is outside the scope of this bill. We are encouraged to hear the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment is giving priority to addressing these issues, and we urge the Ministry to continue to work with players. The Labor members especially noted that the Minister had changed his position from one of stating that there was no issue around security of payment and retentions to one of now actively exploring remedies around those two issues. But the fact is, Mr Speaker, that in that period, which was quite a considerable period of time, there had been no work done. Meanwhile, the Specialist Trades Contractors Federation was clamouring for these changes, saying that it was now 12 months since Mainzeal had collapsed, leading to $70 million in losses, at least $20 million of those losses hitting countless small business were due to the retention centre. The Chief Executive of the New Zealand Contractors Federation also said that his group was looking at challenging legal rulings which backed the liquidators' powers to claw back payments. And I would draw your attention, Mr Speaker, to the fact that Mainzeal was actually one of its directors was Dame Jenny Shipley. Those directors are now, all of those directors are now facing, more than 2 years later, nearly 3 years later, are now facing legal action. as a result of what went on, and yet this government sat on its hands. This government sat on its hands. That the current Minister, Nick Smith, did eventually see the light. Clayton Cosgrove described it as the road to Damascus experience. He did actually see the light and did finally put an SOP forward at the committee stage of the House. In the meantime, what Labor had done was we put our own SOP out into the public, and Clayton Cosgrove went around the country meeting with subcontractors. Chris Farfoy just referred to one of the breakfast meetings he attended. I attended a breakfast meeting. There was a campaign that Labor ran around this because we knew, we could see what was happening, and we knew there was a glaring gap. So how is it that that government didn't do anything about it? Why did they sit on their hands? Why did it take them so long to actually wake up to what was right in front of their faces? And now, Mr. Speaker, now we've got another loopy piece of well, it hasn't turned into legislation yet, but we've now got this new, what's it called, the Rules Reduction Task Force, which is proposing loopy rules, such as builders signing off their own work under from this government task force. So on the one hand, it takes them so long to work out that they have to protect the subcontractors that are actually doing the work on these construction sites, and they reluctantly put forward a key part of this legislation. And on the other hand, they're undertaking another piece of work which is actually looks as if it's loosening up all the rules. And it's disjointed, it's not joined up, and it's madness, to be honest, Mr. Speaker. So Labor did most of the heavy work on this piece of legislation. It's well, Labor did most of the work in bringing forward the important issues in this piece of legislation. Says the apprentice of Dame Jenny Shipley, who's currently facing legal action over the Mainzeal collapse. Labor pointed these things out, brought them to the attention of the government over and over and over again, and it was only at a select committee, at the committee stage of the House, when there was no ability to actually have any real scrutiny of the substantial SOP that appeared before us, no ability to have proper scrutiny of it, that we were faced with finally the government waking up to what had been under their noses all the time. And in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, $20 million was held up for these contractors, for these subcontractors, many of whom had probably faced substantial problems in their own businesses, maybe had gone out of business as a result. In the meantime, also, Mr. Speaker, we have had dozens of collapses in the construction industry with no protections for the subcontractors. Finally, that's going to be remedied when this piece of legislation goes through. But the question has to be asked, and people listening to this at home should be asking themselves, why did it take this government so long? Why didn't they listen to the Select Committee in the first place? Why did the Minister not listen to the submitters and to what was being said by the industry? What was wrong? And I think that it was the work that was done by Clayton Cosgrove around the country, by talking to submitters, talking to subcontractors, that actually that's the real he's the real hero of this piece of legislation.